The stranger rode into Douglas, Arizona territory, just as the sun began its descent behind the jagged mountains, casting long shadows across the dusty street that divided the ramshackle buildings from respectable society. Penelope Zimmerman stood outside the general store, clutching a piece of paper that might as well have been written in ancient Greek for all the good it did her, watching as the tall cowboy dismounted from his weary horse with the kind of fluid grace that made her heart skip despite herself. She turned away quickly, cheeks burning, and stuffed the paper into her apron pocket. The advertisement for employment had been thrust into her hands by the shopkeeper, Mrs. Henderson, who had taken pity on her situation but clearly expected Penelope to handle the matter herself. How could she explain that the carefully printed words were nothing but meaningless squiggles to her eyes? How could she admit, at 22 years old, that she had never learned something most children mastered before they lost their baby teeth? The year was 1878, and Douglas was growing from a rough mining camp into something resembling civilization, though it still retained the wild edge that made respectable women clutch their shawls tighter and men keep their hands near their revolvers. Penelope had arrived 3 weeks earlier on a wagon train from Missouri, fleeing a stepfather who had made life unbearable after her mother's death. She had hoped to find work as a seamstress or perhaps a cook, but every opportunity seemed to require that cursed skill she lacked. "Excuse me, miss." The voice was deep and warm, like honey poured over gravel, and Penelope jumped, nearly dropping her parcel of thread and needles. She turned to find the cowboy standing closer than she had expected, his hat in his hands, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. His eyes were a striking shade of blue-green, like the shallow parts of the creek she remembered from childhood, and his face was weathered but kind. He could not have been much older than his late 20s, though the sun had already left its mark on his skin. "I am sorry, I did not mean to startle you," he continued, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I am Pierce Patterson. I just arrived in town and I was wondering if you might point me toward a decent boarding house." Penelope's throat went dry. She knew the answer, of course. Mrs. Whitmore's establishment was just 2 streets over near the church. But the way he looked at her, with such open friendliness, made her acutely aware of her worn dress and the dust on her boots. "Mrs. Whitmore's place," she managed, her voice coming out softer than intended. "2 streets that way, near the white church with the bell tower." "Much obliged," Pierce said, but he did not immediately leave. Instead, he glanced at the general store behind her, then back to her face. "You work here?" "No, I was just collecting some supplies." The lie felt heavy on her tongue. She had been standing outside the store for the better part of 20 minutes, trying to gather the courage to ask someone to read the advertisement to her without revealing her shameful secret. Pierce nodded slowly, and something in his expression suggested he did not quite believe her, but he was too polite to push. "Well, if you will excuse me, I should get myself settled before dark. It was a pleasure meeting you, Miss Zimmerman, Penelope Zimmerman, Miss Zimmerman." He placed his hat back on his head, tipped it politely, and led his horse down the street toward the boarding house. Penelope watched him go, something fluttering in her chest that she firmly told herself was nothing more than surprise at being addressed so courteously. She had more pressing concerns than handsome cowboys with kind eyes. The next morning, Penelope found herself at the small cafe where she had been washing dishes in exchange for meals. The owner, a gruff man named Samuel Perkins, had agreed to let her sleep in the storage room until she could afford proper lodging. It was not much, but it was better than the alternatives. "You going to stand there daydreaming, or you going to get these plates clean?" Samuel barked from the kitchen, and Penelope hurried to the wash basin, plunging her hands into the lukewarm water. The breakfast rush came and went, and Penelope was scrubbing the last of the pans when she heard a familiar voice asking for coffee. Her heart inexplicably jumped as she recognized Pierce Patterson's warm tone. She peered through the narrow gap between the kitchen and the dining area, watching as he settled into a chair near the window. Samuel poured his coffee without ceremony and slapped a menu down on the table. Eggs and bacon, or beans and cornbread. That is what we have got today. Eggs and bacon sound fine, Pierce replied, pulling out a newspaper from his saddlebag. He unfolded it carefully, smoothing it on the table before him, and began to read while he waited for his food. Penelope felt a familiar pang of longing mixed with shame. To read so casually, as if it were nothing special, as if those black marks on white paper simply surrendered their secrets without effort. She had watched countless people perform this small miracle, had memorized the shapes of certain words through sheer repetition, but true reading remained beyond her grasp. "Stop gawking and finish those pans," Samuel grunted, catching her staring. "Then you can sweep the dining room." By the time she emerged with her broom, Pierce had finished his breakfast and was absorbed in his newspaper, a slight frown of concentration on his face. Penelope began sweeping in the corner farthest from him, hoping to remain unnoticed, but luck was not on her side. "Miss Zimmerman," Pierce said, looking up with a smile of recognition. "I did not realize you worked here." "Just helping out," she murmured, focusing intently on a non-existent spot of dirt near the table leg. "It is honest work," Pierce said, folding his newspaper. "Nothing to be ashamed of." "I have done my share of dish washing on the trail." Penelope glanced up, surprised by the statement. Most men would consider such work beneath them, certainly too beneath them to admit to it in casual conversation. "What brings you to Douglas?" she asked, curiosity overcoming her shyness. Pierce leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "I am a ranch hand by trade, but I have been working as a deputy up in Prescott for the past year. Wanted a change of scenery, and I heard they might be looking for someone to help manage the new cattle operation starting up east of town. Figure I would try my hand at something more peaceful than law enforcement." "Was it very dangerous?" "Being a deputy, at times," he admitted. "Though mostly it was breaking up saloon fights and tracking down stolen horses. Nothing too thrilling, but enough to make a man appreciate the idea of working with cattle instead of criminals." He paused, studying her face. "What about you? Have you been in Douglas long?" "A few weeks. I came from Missouri. Long journey. You have family here?" Penelope shook her head, gripping the broom handle tighter. "No family anywhere, really. My mother passed 2 years ago, and I had no desire to stay where I was." Something shifted in Pierce's expression, a softening that spoke of understanding. "I am sorry about your mother. It is not easy making a new start in a strange place." "No, it is not," Penelope agreed quietly. Before the conversation could continue, Samuel emerged from the kitchen, scowling at Penelope. "Those floors are not going to sweep themselves, girl. And the back stoop needs scrubbing after you finish in here." Pierce's eyebrows rose slightly at the harsh tone, but he said nothing. He simply placed a coin on the table for his meal and another beside it. "For the excellent service," he said, loud enough for Samuel to hear but with his eyes on Penelope. She felt heat rise to her cheeks as she nodded her thanks, watching as he gathered his newspaper and headed for the door. Just before he left, he turned back. "Miss Zimmerman, if you ever need anything, I will be staying at Mrs. Whitmore's for the foreseeable future. Please do not hesitate to ask." The offer hung in the air long after he departed, and Penelope found herself thinking about those blue-green eyes while she scrubbed the back stoop until her knuckles were raw. 3 days passed before she saw Pierce again, and by then, her situation had grown more desperate. Samuel had informed her that morning that he could no longer afford to keep her on, even for just meals and lodging. The cafe was not doing well enough, he claimed, though she suspected it had more to do with his wife's disapproval of having a young woman sleeping in their storage room. Penelope sat on the bench outside the general store, the same advertisement still folded in her pocket, watching the townspeople go about their business. She had exactly $2.30 to her name, and the cheapest boarding house in town charged $4 a week. She could not afford lodging, and without lodging she could not get respectable work. It was a trap with no visible exit. "Miss Zimmerman." She looked up to find Pierce standing before her, concern evident on his face. "Are you all right? You look troubled." Pride warred with desperation, and desperation won. "I am. I have found myself in a difficult position," she admitted, unable to meet his eyes. "Mr. Perkins can no longer employ me, and I am afraid I do not have the means to secure other lodging or work." Pierce settled onto the bench beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "What kind of work are you looking for? Anything honest? I can sew clean, cook reasonably well. I am not afraid of hard work." She swallowed hard. "But most positions seem to require." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Require what? This was the moment. She could either continue to hide her shame and likely end up destitute, or she could trust this kind stranger with her secret. Penelope pulled the advertisement from her pocket, her hands trembling slightly. "This was given to me. They said it was for a position as a housekeeper for a ranch owner's wife. Good wages, room and board included, but I—" Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I cannot read or write." The confession hung between them like a physical thing, heavy with her shame. She waited for the inevitable judgment, the pity or worse, the dismissal. Instead, Pierce gently took the paper from her hands and read it aloud. "Wanted. Respectable woman for housekeeping and cooking at the Double T Ranch. Room and board provided plus $6 monthly. Inquire at the land office before Friday." He looked at her, and there was no pity in his eyes, only warmth. "That is tomorrow." "I know," Penelope said miserably. "Mrs. Henderson told me when it was, but I cannot very well present myself if I cannot even read what the position entails, can I?" They would discover the truth soon enough, and then I would be dismissed in disgrace. Pierce was quiet for a moment, and she braced herself for the platitudes or uncomfortable retreat. Instead, he smiled, not mockingly but with genuine kindness. "Then I will teach you everything." Penelope's head snapped up. "What? Reading, writing, whatever you need to know. It is not something to be ashamed of, Miss Zimmerman. Plenty of folks never had the opportunity to learn. My own mother could not read until she was nearly 30, when my father taught her during the long winters." "But why would you? I mean, you barely know me, and it would take time you surely do not have to spare for a stranger." Pierce folded the advertisement carefully and handed it back to her. "I will make time. As for why, let us just say I believe everyone deserves a fair chance, and I would hate to see someone as clearly hardworking as yourself struggle for lack of a skill that can be taught." He stood, extending his hand to help her up. "Now, we have got until tomorrow to at least teach you enough to get through an interview. After that, if you want to continue learning, we will make a regular schedule of it." Penelope took his hand, feeling calluses that spoke of years of hard work, and allowed herself to be pulled to her feet. "I do not know what to say. Say you will meet me at the church in an hour. It will be quiet there, and the Reverend will not mind us using the back room. I saw it when I attended services on Sunday. Bring that advertisement and anything else you have been trying to read." The next hour passed in a blur of nervous energy. Penelope gathered the few papers she had accumulated, mostly notices and signs she had collected in hopes of someday deciphering them. She changed into her only other dress, which was slightly less worn than the one she had been wearing, and attempted to tame her auburn hair into something presentable. When she arrived at the church, Pierce was already there, seated at a small table in the back room with several books spread before him. The late afternoon sun streamed through the single window, casting everything in warm, golden light. "Thank you for this," Penelope said as she sat across from him. "I truly do not know how to repay your kindness." "No repayment necessary," Pierce assured her. "Now let us start with the basics. You know your letters, some of them." "I know A and B and a few others, but not all of them, and I am not always certain which is which." Pierce pulled out a sheet of paper and a pencil. "Then that is where we will begin." He started drawing letters, large and clear, saying their names and the sounds they made. Penelope watched, fascinated, as his strong hands shaped each character with surprising delicacy. He was patient beyond measure, never showing frustration when she confused similar-looking letters or forgot what he had just told her. "The important thing," he explained, "is not to memorize everything at once. Just get familiar with how letters work, how they come together to make sounds, and how those sounds make words." They worked through the alphabet, and then Pierce began showing her how letters combined. He wrote cat and sounded it out slowly, pointing to each letter. Then hat and mat, showing her the pattern. "You see, once you understand the pattern, you can apply it to new words. It is like learning a code." Penelope felt something spark in her mind, a connection she had never made before. It was not magic or some special talent she lacked. It was simply a system, a pattern that could be learned like any other skill. "Say the letters with me," Pierce encouraged, writing bat on the paper. "B makes the bus sound, A makes A, T makes T, put them together, bat." "Bat," Penelope repeated, feeling a thrill of accomplishment when Pierce's face lit up with approval. They continued until the sun began to set, and the Reverend's wife came in to light the lamps. Pierce glanced at the darkening window and gathered his papers. "We should continue this tomorrow, but earlier. You need to be able to at least recognize a few key words for your interview. Can you meet me here after breakfast? Say 8 o'clock. "I will be here," Penelope promised. She hesitated at the door. "Pierce, this means more to me than I can properly express." He smiled that warm smile that made her heart do strange things. "You are doing the hard part, Miss Zimmerman. I am just pointing you in the right direction." That night, as she lay on her bedroll in the storage room for what might be the last time, Penelope traced the letters Pierce had taught her in the air, mouthing their sounds. For the first time since arriving in Douglas, she felt something like hope. The next morning arrived far too quickly. Penelope met Pierce at the church, and they spent 2 intense hours reviewing basic words, focusing especially on the ones in the advertisement. Pierce wrote out common questions she might be asked and helped her practice answering them. He also wrote her name for her over and over until she could recognize it on sight. "The most important thing," he said, "is not to panic if you cannot read something. Many folks are not strong readers, so if you need to take your time, that is acceptable. Just do not freeze up." At 10 o'clock, Pierce walked with her to the land office. The clerk, a thin man with spectacles, looked up from his desk with a slightly impatient expression. "Help you?" "I am here about the position at the Double T Ranch," Penelope said, keeping her voice steady. The clerk shuffled through some papers and pulled out a form. "Fill this out. Name, age, previous employment references." Penelope's heart sank. She looked at the form, at the blank lines that might as well have been chasms. Beside her, Pierce cleared his throat. "Excuse me, but the lady has injured her hand washing dishes. Perhaps she could provide the information verbally and you could record it." The clerk looked annoyed but nodded. "Fine. Name, Penelope Zimmerman. Age, 22. The questions continued, and Penelope answered each one, silently blessing Pierce for his quick thinking. When the clerk finished, he directed her to the Double T Ranch, about 5 miles east of town. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson will be there this afternoon. Present yourself before 3 o'clock. Outside, Penelope let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Thank you. I would have been completely lost without you. You would have found a way, Pierce said, but his eyes were warm with concern. Do you have transportation to the ranch? I will walk. In this heat. It is November, but the sun is still fierce this time of day. Let me take you. I need to head out that direction anyway to speak with the cattle operation I mentioned. Penelope wanted to refuse, to maintain some shred of independence, but practicality won out. The walk would take at least 2 hours, and she would arrive exhausted and dusty. I would be grateful. Pierce's horse was a sturdy roan gelding named Copper, and he handled the animal with the easy confidence of someone who had spent most of his life on horseback. He helped Penelope up behind him, and she had no choice but to hold onto his waist as they rode out of town. The closeness was both terrifying and thrilling. She could feel the warmth of his body through his shirt, smell the faint scent of soap and leather and something uniquely him. They did not speak much during the ride, but the silence was comfortable, broken only by the steady rhythm of Copper's hooves and the occasional call of a hawk overhead. The Double T Ranch came into view just before noon. A sprawling adobe house surrounded by corrals and outbuildings, with the Mule Mountains rising dramatically in the background. Several horses grazed in a nearby pasture, and Penelope could see cattle dotting the hills beyond. Pierce helped her down, and she tried not to notice how his hands lingered at her waist, strong and steady. You will do fine, he assured her. Just be honest and hardworking, and they would be fools not to hire you. Will you? Will you wait, in case? She trailed off, not wanting to voice her fear of rejection. I will wait, he promised. Mrs. Thompson was a plump, cheerful woman in her early 40s with graying blonde hair and a smile that reached her eyes. She welcomed Penelope into the cool interior of the house and offered her lemonade, which Penelope accepted gratefully. My husband and I have been managing this ranch for 3 years now, Mrs. Thompson explained, and I am afraid I am just overwhelmed with the housework and cooking. He wants to expand the herd, which means more ranch hands, which means more mouths to feed. I need someone reliable and hardworking, someone who will not run off at the first sign of difficulty. I am not afraid of hard work, madam. I have been cooking and cleaning since I was old enough to reach the stove. Mrs. Thompson nodded approvingly. Do you have references? Penelope had prepared for this question. I only recently arrived from Missouri, so I do not have local references. But Mr. Samuel Perkins at the cafe in town can speak to my work ethic, and Reverend Michaels at the church can provide a character reference. It was a slight stretching of the truth, as the Reverend knew her only from Pierce's introduction the previous evening, but he had seemed kind enough to vouch for her if asked. That sounds reasonable. Let me show you what the work would entail, Mrs. Thompson led her through the house, explaining the daily and weekly tasks. It was substantial work, but nothing Penelope felt incapable of handling. The best part was the small but tidy room off the kitchen that would be hers if she was hired, with a real bed and a window overlooking the mountains. When could you start? Mrs. Thompson asked. Immediately if you need me. Then the position is yours. $6 a month, room and board, Sundays off after breakfast dishes are done. We eat breakfast at 6, lunch at noon, supper at 6. Is that acceptable? Relief flooded through Penelope so intensely she felt dizzy. Yes, madam, absolutely. Good. My husband will be back this evening and I will introduce you then. Do you need to collect your things from town? I do not have much, but yes, I should gather my belongings. Go ahead and do that. We will expect you back by supper time. Penelope practically floated out of the house. Pierce stood in the shade of a cottonwood tree, and his face broke into a genuine smile when he saw her expression. You got it. I got it. She wanted to throw her arms around him in celebration, but maintained propriety by a thin thread. I start today. I just need to get my things from town. Then let us get you back to Douglas. On the ride back, Penelope felt lighter than she had in months, perhaps years. The future that had seemed so bleak just yesterday now held genuine possibility. And it was all because of the kind cowboy who had taken the time to help a struggling stranger. I meant what I said, Pierce told her as they rode, about continuing the lessons. You made excellent progress, and with regular practice, you could be reading full sentences within a few months. I would like that very much, but I do not want to impose on your time. You are not imposing. Truth be told, I enjoy teaching. It reminds me of my mother and father, the patience he showed her. He paused. And I would like to continue seeing you if you are amenable to that. Penelope's heart skipped. For the lessons, yes, but also because I find your company pleasant, Miss Zimmerman. If I am being too forward, please say so, and I will confine myself to strictly educational visits. You are not being too forward, Penelope said softly, tightening her grip slightly on his waist. I find your company pleasant as well. She felt rather than saw his smile, and something warm and promising settled in her chest. The next few weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm. Penelope threw herself into her work at the Double T Ranch, determined to prove Mrs. Thompson's faith in her was well placed. The work was demanding, but she found satisfaction in it. The gleaming clean kitchen after she finished the breakfast dishes, the savory smell of a stew simmering for the ranch hands, the crisp sheets on freshly made beds. Mr. Thompson was a gruff but fair man in his late 40s, with sun-weathered skin and a booming laugh. He treated Penelope with respect, and more importantly, he treated his wife with obvious affection, which made the house feel warm and welcoming despite the harsh landscape surrounding it. Pierce visited every Sunday afternoon as regular as clockwork. They would sit in the shade of the cottonwood tree, and he would guide her through letters and words, celebrating each small victory. She learned to write her name, then simple sentences. He brought books, starting with a child's primer and gradually working up to more complex texts. You are a natural student, he told her one particularly warm Sunday in December. They had been working for over a month, and Penelope could now read simple passages with only occasional help. You pick things up faster than anyone I have taught. That is because you are an excellent teacher, Penelope countered, looking up from the page. You have the patience of a saint. I have learned that anything worth doing requires patience. His eyes met hers, and there was something in his gaze that made her breath catch. And you are certainly worth the time. The comment hung between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. Slowly, carefully, Pierce reached out and took her hand. His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm, and Penelope felt heat rise to her cheeks. I have been meaning to ask you something, Pierce said, his voice slightly uncertain in a way she had never heard before. There is a dance in town next Saturday at the community hall. Would you accompany me? Penelope's first instinct was to refuse. She had never attended a proper dance, had no suitable dress, and the thought of stumbling through unfamiliar steps in front of the whole town terrified her. But when she looked at Pierce, at the hope and vulnerability in his expression, she found herself nodding. I would like that very much. His smile could have lit up the darkening evening. I will collect you at 6 o'clock if Mrs. Thompson can spare you. I am certain she will. Penelope hesitated, then added, though I should warn you I am not much of a dancer." "Then I will teach you that too," Pierce said, his grin turning playful. "Stand up." "What now? Why not? We have got the space and I can hum a tune well enough." Feeling slightly foolish but caught up in his enthusiasm, Penelope stood. Pierce positioned her hands, one on his shoulder and the other clasped in his other hand resting lightly on her waist. "The waltz is simple," he explained, his face now close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his blue-green eyes. "It is just a box pattern. Step back with your right foot, bring your left foot to meet it, step to the side. Then forward with your right, bring your left to meet it and side again. Like this." He began to hum a waltz tune, guiding her through the steps. Penelope stumbled at first, concentrating fiercely on her feet, but Pierce's steady grip kept her from falling. "Do not look at your feet," he instructed gently. "Look at me. Trust that your feet will follow." Penelope raised her eyes to his, and suddenly the steps became easier. They moved together in the fading light, his humming the only sound besides the whisper of the wind through the cottonwood branches. She became aware of the warmth of his hand at her waist, the strength in his arms, the way he smelled like sage and sunshine. "There," Pierce said softly. "You are dancing." And she was. They moved together as if they had been doing this for years, not minutes. Penelope felt something shift inside her, a recognition that this moment was important, that this man holding her so carefully was becoming essential to her happiness. When the impromptu lesson ended, Pierce did not immediately release her. They stood there, his hand still at her waist, her hand still on his shoulder, looking at each other in the twilight. "I should go," Penelope whispered, though she made no move to step away. "Yes," Pierce agreed, but he did not move either. Finally, with visible reluctance, he released her and stepped back. "Until next Saturday, then. Until Saturday." The week leading up to the dance seemed to drag interminably. Penelope threw herself into her work, but her mind kept drifting to Pierce, to the feeling of being in his arms, to the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. Mrs. Thompson noticed her distraction and smiled knowingly. "That cowboy who comes for the reading lessons, he is taking you to the dance." "Yes, madam, if you can spare me." "Of course I can spare you. A young woman should have some enjoyment in life." Mrs. Thompson paused, studying Penelope with a maternal expression. "He is a good man from what I hear around town. Honest, hardworking, respectful. You could do far worse." "We are just friends," Penelope protested, but even to her own ears the words rang hollow. "Hum. And my husband just happens to bring me wildflowers because he is being friendly." Mrs. Thompson's eyes twinkled. "That cowboy looks at you like you hang the moon, dear. And unless I am very much mistaken, you look at him the same way." Penelope could not deny it. The affection she felt for Pierce had grown from gratitude to something far deeper, something that made her heart race and her palms sweat, and her thoughts scatter like autumn leaves. "I do not have anything suitable to wear to a dance," she admitted, changing the subject slightly. Mrs. Thompson's face brightened. "Come with me. I have something that might work." She led Penelope to her bedroom and opened a large trunk, pulling out a dress of deep blue calico with cream-colored lace at the collar and cuffs. It was beautiful, far nicer than anything Penelope had ever owned. "I wore this when I was younger and slimmer, Mrs. Thompson said with a self-deprecating laugh. "It should fit you nicely. Consider it an early Christmas present." "I could not possibly," Penelope protested, though her fingers itched to touch the soft fabric. "You can and you will. What good is a dress sitting in a trunk? It deserves to be worn and admired." She pressed it into Penelope's hands. "Now let us see if it needs any alterations." The dress fit perfectly, hugging Penelope's waist and falling in graceful folds to the floor. When she looked at herself in Mrs. Thompson's mirror, She barely recognized the young woman staring back at her. She looked pretty, even elegant, and the thought of Pierce seeing her in this dress made her heart flutter wildly. Saturday arrived bright and clear, unusually warm for mid-December in the Arizona Territory. Penelope spent the day in a state of nervous anticipation, nearly burning the lunch biscuits and twice forgetting what she had walked into a room to fetch. Mrs. Thompson shooed her away after lunch to rest and prepare, and Penelope spent an hour carefully arranging her hair, pinning it up in a style she hoped looked sophisticated. At precisely 6 o'clock, she heard the sound of horse hooves approaching the house. She took one last look in the small mirror in her room, smoothing down the blue dress, and went to meet Pierce. He stood beside a small wagon, dressed in a clean white shirt and dark trousers, his hair neatly combed, holding his hat in his hands. When he saw her emerge from the house, his expression transformed into something like awe. "Miss Zimmerman, you look." He seemed to struggle for words. "You look absolutely beautiful." "Thank you," Penelope managed, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "You look very handsome yourself." Pierce helped her into the wagon, his touch lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary, and they set off toward Douglas. The evening air was pleasant, cooling but not cold, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the deepening blue sky. "I have been looking forward to this all week," Pierce admitted as they rode. "I should warn you, though, I might not be the best dancer in town. I am a bit rusty." "That makes two of us. We can be rusty together." The community hall was already bustling when they arrived, lit by lanterns that cast warm, golden light across the assembled crowd. A small group of musicians occupied one corner, a fiddle player, someone with a guitar, and a man with a harmonica. The music was lively and welcoming, and several couples were already dancing. Pierce offered his arm, and Penelope took it, feeling both thrilled and terrified as they entered. Several people glanced their way, some with curiosity, others with knowing smiles. Penelope recognized a few faces from town. Mrs. Henderson from the general store, Reverend Michaels and his wife, even Samuel Perkins, who nodded at her with something approximating approval. "Would you like some punch?" Pierce asked, gesturing to a table laden with refreshments. "That sounds lovely." They made their way to the refreshment table, and Pierce procured 2 cups of fruit punch. As Penelope sipped hers, a tall woman in a green dress approached them. She was perhaps a year or two older than Penelope, with dark hair and sharp features that might have been pretty if not for the calculating look in her eyes. "Pierce Patterson," the woman said, her voice carrying an edge that immediately put Penelope on guard. "I heard you were back in town." "It has been quite a while." "Hello, Margaret," Pierce replied, his tone polite but noticeably cooler than his usual warmth. "Yes, it has been some time." Margaret's eyes slid to Penelope, assessing her from head to toe in a way that made Penelope want to shrink back. "And who is this?" "This is Miss Penelope Zimmerman. Penelope, this is Margaret Fairchild. We knew each other when we were younger." "How nice," Margaret said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "I am surprised to see you here, Pierce. I thought you were sworn off dancing after that incident in Prescott." Pierce's jaw tightened slightly. "I do not recall being sworn off anything, Margaret. Now, if you will excuse us, I believe the next dance is starting." He took Penelope's cup and set it down, then guided her toward the dance floor before Margaret could respond. Penelope could feel the other woman's gaze boring into her back. "Old friend?" she asked as Pierce positioned them for the dance. "Old acquaintance would be more accurate. She was courted by my brother years ago, and when he married someone else, she seemed to think I would step in as a replacement. I made it clear I was not interested." The fiddle struck up a waltz and Pierce pulled Penelope into the familiar box step pattern they had practiced. This time, with the music swelling around them and the other couples swirling nearby, it felt magical. Penelope forgot about Margaret's coldness, forgot about her nervousness, forgot about everything except the man holding her and the way they moved together. "You are a wonderful dancer," Pierce murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "I have a wonderful teacher." They danced 3 waltzes in a row and then a lively reel that left them both breathless and laughing. During a break in the music, they stepped outside for some air. The night had grown properly cool now, and Penelope shivered slightly in her thin dress. Without a word, Pierce shrugged off his jacket and draped it around her shoulders. "Thank you," she said, pulling it close and breathing in his scent from the fabric. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the stars. Pierce cleared his throat, suddenly seeming nervous. "Penelope, there is something I want to tell you, something I have been wanting to say for a while now." Her heart began to race. "Yes. These past weeks, getting to know you, teaching you to raid, spending time with you, it has meant more to me than I can properly express. You are intelligent, determined, kind, and beautiful, and I find myself thinking about you constantly." He turned to face her fully, taking her hands in his. "I know we have not known each other long, but I cannot deny what I am feeling. I am falling in love with you, Penelope. Actually, I think I have already fallen." The words hung in the night air, precious and terrifying and exactly what she had been hoping to hear. Penelope looked up into his earnest face, at the vulnerability in his eyes, and felt her own truth rise to the surface. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I think I started falling the moment you offered to teach me, when you showed me kindness without judgment." Pierce's face transformed with joy, and he pulled her closer, his hands coming up to cup her face with infinite gentleness. "May I kiss you?" "Yes," Penelope breathed. He lowered his head slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, but she did not want to. When his lips met hers, soft and warm and sweet, Penelope felt as if something had clicked into place, as if she had found something she had not even known she was searching for. The kiss was tender and full of promise, and when they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," Pierce admitted, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "I wish you had done it sooner," Penelope replied, feeling bold. He laughed and kissed her again, deeper this time, and Penelope wrapped her arms around his neck, losing herself in the feeling of being held and cherished and loved. When they finally returned to the dance, she did not miss the sharp look Margaret sent their way, but it did not matter. Nothing mattered except the man beside her and the future that suddenly seemed bright with possibility. The winter passed in a blur of happiness. Pierce secured the position with the new cattle operation, managing a herd that ranged across the hills east of Douglas. The work kept him busy, but he made time every Sunday without fail to visit Penelope at the ranch. Their reading lessons continued, though they often ended with stolen kisses beneath the cottonwood tree and whispered conversations about their hopes and dreams. By February, Penelope could read simple books on her own and write coherent letters. Pierce had started teaching her arithmetic as well, showing her how numbers worked together just as letters did. Each new skill felt like a door opening, revealing a world she had been locked out of for so long. "You will be ready for Shakespeare soon," Pierce teased one Sunday afternoon as they sat side by side, her head resting on his shoulder. "I do not know about that," Penelope laughed. "But I can read the newspaper now, and that feels like magic." "It is not magic. It is your hard work and determination." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I am so proud of you." Spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers across the desert landscape, painting the hills in impossible colors. On a particularly beautiful Sunday in April, Pierce arrived at the ranch with an unusually nervous energy. Penelope noticed immediately the way he kept fidgeting with his hat, the way his eyes would not quite meet hers. "Is something wrong?" she asked as they settled into their usual spot. "Not wrong exactly, just important." He took a deep breath and suddenly dropped to one knee, pulling a small box from his pocket. "Penelope Zimmerman, these past months with you have been the happiest of my life. You are brilliant and strong and beautiful, and I want to spend the rest of my days making you smile. Will you marry me?" He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small but pretty turquoise stone set in the center. It was not fancy or expensive, but to Penelope, it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Tears sprang to her eyes as she nodded emphatically. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Pierce's face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen, and he slipped the ring onto her finger before standing and sweeping her into his arms. He spun her around, both of them laughing with pure joy, before setting her down and kissing her soundly. "I love you so much," he murmured against her lips. "I love you too. More than I ever thought possible." They were married 6 weeks later, on a sunny Saturday in late May, in the small church where they had first sat together learning letters. Reverend Michaels performed the ceremony, and the church was packed with well-wishers. Mrs. Thompson had insisted on making Penelope's dress, a beautiful creation of white cotton with delicate embroidery. Mr. Thompson walked her down the aisle, having offered when he learned she had no family to do the honor. Pierce stood at the altar in a new suit, his eyes shining with unshed tears as he watched her approach. When she reached him, he took her hands and whispered, "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other through all of life's trials. When Reverend Michaels pronounced them husband and wife, Pierce kissed her with such tenderness that several people in the congregation sighed. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with tables set up under the cottonwood tree and enough food to feed half the town. Someone brought a fiddle, and there was dancing as the sun set in brilliant oranges and pinks across the desert sky. Penelope danced with her new husband, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Happy, Mrs. Patterson?" Pierce asked as they swayed to a slow tune. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Penelope replied honestly. "A year ago I was alone and frightened and convinced I had no future. Now I have you, a home, a family, everything I could want." "You have always had a future," Pierce corrected gently. "You just needed someone to believe in you until you could believe in yourself." They spent their wedding night in a small house Pierce had been renting in town, and Penelope discovered new ways to express love, new forms of closeness and intimacy that left her breathless and amazed. Pierce was patient and tender, guiding her through the unfamiliar territory with the same care he had shown when teaching her to read. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Pierce traced lazy patterns on her shoulder. "I have something to tell you." "What is it?" "Mr. Thompson approached me last week. He is getting older and wants to eventually retire. He asked if we would be interested in taking over management of the Double T Ranch in a few years, with the option to buy it when he and Mrs. Thompson are ready to move to California to be near their daughter." Penelope propped herself up on her elbow, looking down at her husband's face in the moonlight streaming through the window. "Are you serious?" "Completely. He says you are the best help his wife has ever had, and he trusts me with the cattle operation. He wants to train us to run the whole enterprise." Pierce's hand came up to cup her cheek. "What do you think? You want to be a ranch owner someday?" "I think," Penelope said slowly, "that a year ago I could not even read my own name, and now I am being offered a chance to own a ranch. Life has a strange way of surprising us." "Is that a yes?" "That is absolutely a yes." They sealed the agreement with a kiss that quickly led to other things, and Penelope marveled at how her life had transformed so completely. The next few years were busy and fulfilling. Pierce and Penelope moved into a small house on the Double T property, close enough to help the Thompsons but far enough to have their own space. They worked hard, learning every aspect of ranch management. Penelope continued her education, graduating from simple readers to novels and eventually to the account books, where she discovered an aptitude for numbers that surprised them both. "You are better at the finances than I am," Pierce admitted one evening as they reviewed the ranch expenses together. "Look how you organized everything by category and date. It makes perfect sense." "I think I like the orderliness of it," Penelope said, tapping her pencil against the ledger. "Everything balances out if you are careful enough." Their first child arrived in the spring of 1881, a squalling baby boy with his father's blue-green eyes and his mother's auburn hair. They named him Peter, and Pierce cried when he held his son for the first time. "He is perfect," he whispered, looking at Penelope with such love and gratitude that it made her own eyes water. "You are perfect. I am the luckiest man alive." "We are both lucky," Penelope corrected, watching her husband cradle their son with infinite gentleness. "We found each other when we each needed someone most." Peter was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Patricia, with dark hair and a sunny disposition. The Thompsons doted on both children, and Mrs. Thompson declared that having little ones around made her feel young again. In 1884, the Thompsons officially decided to retire and move to California. They sold the Double T Ranch to Pierce and Penelope for a price far below market value, insisting that they wanted it to go to people who would love and care for it as they had. "You two have become like family to us," Mr. Thompson said, his voice gruff with emotion. "This ranch deserves to stay with family." The day the Thompsons departed was bittersweet, full of tears and promises to write. Penelope hugged Mrs. Thompson tightly, thanking her for the kindness she had shown a frightened young woman years before. "You were never as helpless as you thought," Mrs. Thompson told her. "You just needed the right circumstances to bloom. Look at you now, a ranch owner, a mother, a woman who can read and write and manage accounts. I am so proud of you." As Pierce and Penelope stood watching the wagon carry the Thompsons away, Pierce wrapped his arm around his wife's waist. Peter, now a rambunctious 4-year-old, tugged at his father's pant leg. "Papa, is this really our ranch now?" "It really is, son. All of it. The horses and cows and everything." "Everything," Penelope confirmed, picking up 2-year-old Patricia, who was getting fussy in the heat. "And someday, it will be yours and your sister's." Peter's eyes went wide with wonder, and he took off running toward the barn, probably to inform the horses of this important development. Penelope and Pierce looked at each other and laughed. "We should probably go make sure he does not try to ride by himself again," Penelope said. "Probably," Pierce agreed, but he took a moment to kiss her first, sweet and lingering. "I love you, Penelope Patterson. Have I told you that today? Only 3 times. You are falling behind." "Then let me remedy that. I love you, I love you, I love you." He punctuated each declaration with a kiss on her nose, her cheek, her lips. There, back on schedule. Patricia giggled and reached for her father, and Pierce took her, settling her on his hip. Together, the 3 of them walked toward the barn, toward their son and their animals and their life together. The years continued to pass, each bringing its own challenges and joys. There were hard winters when they worried about the cattle, dry summers when water became precious, occasional conflicts with neighboring ranchers over grazing rights. But through it all, Pierce and Penelope faced everything together, their partnership strengthening with each obstacle overcome. Penelope's reading and writing continued to improve until she was completely fluent, and she developed a love of literature that surprised her. Pierce would often find her in the evening, curled up in the chair by the fireplace with a book, completely absorbed. He never tired of watching her read, remembering the shame in her voice that day outside the general store when she had confessed her inability. "What are you reading?" he would ask, and she would tell him, often reading her favorite passages aloud. Sometimes she would read to the children, passing on the gift she had been given. In 1887, a letter arrived from Mrs. Thompson, written in her careful hand. Mr. Thompson had passed away peacefully in his sleep, she wrote, and though she was grieving, she was comforted by the knowledge that the ranch they had built was in good hands. The letter made both Pierce and Penelope cry, and they held a small memorial service at the ranch, inviting everyone who had known the Thompsons. That same year, Penelope discovered she was pregnant again. At 31, she was older than she had been with the first two, and the pregnancy was harder. But in the spring of 1888, she delivered a healthy baby girl they named Pearl. She had Pierce's dark hair and Penelope's green eyes, and her older siblings were instantly smitten. "She is so tiny," Peter observed, now 7 years old and trying to act grown up. "Was I that small?" "You were exactly that small," Pierce confirmed, ruffling his son's hair. "And just as perfect." Patricia, now 5, declared that Pearl was her baby and appointed herself assistant caretaker, a role she took very seriously. Penelope would often find her daughter sitting beside the cradle, singing lullabies she had learned from her mother. As the 1880s drew to a close, the Double T Ranch had grown into one of the most successful operations in the Douglas area. Pierce had a good eye for cattle, and under Penelope's careful financial management, they had expanded their herd and improved their infrastructure. They employed several ranch hands, treating them fairly and earning their loyalty in return. The Arizona Territory was changing too. Douglas was growing rapidly, with new businesses opening and more families settling in the area. The railroad had come through, bringing increased commerce and connection to the wider world. The wild, lawless edge that had characterized the region when Penelope first arrived was gradually being tamed, replaced by schools and churches and civic organizations. On a warm evening in September 1889, Pierce and Penelope sat on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over the mountains. The children were inside, theoretically getting ready for bed, though the sounds of giggles and running feet suggested that bedtime was still being negotiated. "Do you ever think about that first day we met?" Pierce asked, taking Penelope's hand in his. "When I asked you for directions to the boarding house." "I think about it often," Penelope admitted. "I was so lost then, so frightened and ashamed. I could not imagine a future for myself. And now I cannot imagine my life any other way. I have a husband I adore, 3 beautiful children, a successful ranch, and the ability to read the books I love and manage our accounts." She squeezed his hand. "You gave me all of that. You saw past my shame to the person I could become." Pierce shook his head. "I did not give you anything, love. I just showed you what was already there. You did the hard work. You learned to read and write. You became an excellent ranch manager. You built this life as much as I did." "We built it together," Penelope corrected. "That is what matters. We found each other when we each needed someone, and we built something beautiful." A crash from inside the house, followed by Peter's voice saying, "I did not mean to," interrupted the moment. Pierce stood with a long, suffering sigh. "I should probably go see what that was about before your daughter convinces them to sneak outside for a midnight adventure." "Our daughter," Penelope corrected with a smile. "She gets the adventurous streak from you." "Fair point." As Pierce headed inside to deal with whatever minor disaster had occurred, Penelope remained on the porch, looking out at the land they had worked so hard to build into a thriving ranch. The mountains stood sentinel in the distance, painted in shades of purple and gold by the setting sun. Somewhere in the corrals, horses nickered softly. The air smelled of dust and sage and the promise of cooler weather to come. She thought about the frightened young woman who had arrived in Douglas over a decade ago, clutching a piece of paper she could not read, with no prospects and no hope. She thought about the moment Pierce had smiled at her and said, "Then I will teach you everything." She thought about how a simple act of kindness had transformed both their lives. A few minutes later, Pierce emerged with Pearl in his arms and Peter and Patricia trailing behind him. "Someone wants to say goodnight to Mama before bed." Penelope took her youngest daughter, inhaling her sweet baby smell, and kissed her soft head. "Good night, my darling girl." After the children were tucked in and finally settled, Pierce and Penelope returned to the porch. He pulled her close and she leaned into his warmth, perfectly content. "I love you," Pierce murmured into her hair. "More than the day I married you, more than yesterday, and less than I will tomorrow." "That is very poetic for a cowboy," Penelope teased. "I read it in one of your books. Thought you might appreciate it." She tilted her head up to kiss him, long and sweet. "I do appreciate it, and I love you too with everything I am." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky. The future stretched before them, full of possibility and promise, and Penelope knew that whatever challenges came, they would face them together as they always had. The story could have ended there, a perfect snapshot of hard-won happiness. But life continued, as it always does, bringing new chapters and new adventures. In the spring of 1890, Penelope received an unexpected letter from Missouri. It was from a woman named Sarah Wilkins, who introduced herself as a distant cousin of Penelope's mother. She had recently learned of Penelope's whereabouts through a series of connections and wanted to reach out, to let Penelope know that she had family, however distant, who thought of her. The letter brought tears to Penelope's eyes. She had spent so many years believing herself completely alone in the world, and here was evidence that she was connected to others, that her mother's memory lived on in people who had cared about her. She wrote back immediately, her handwriting neat and clear, telling Sarah about her life in Arizona, about Pierce and the children and the ranch. It felt good to share her story, to connect with someone who had known her mother. That correspondence began a friendship conducted through letters that would last for years. Sarah eventually visited in 1892, traveling all the way from Missouri to meet the family. She was a cheerful woman in her 50s with her late cousin's eyes, and she regaled the children with stories about their grandmother as a young woman. "Your mother would be so proud of you," Sarah told Penelope one evening as they sat together shelling peas. "She always wanted better for you than what she had. To know that you found love and built this life, it would have made her so happy." "I wish she could have met Pierce and the children," Penelope said softly. "I think she would have loved that cowboy of yours. He has kind eyes." The children adored their newfound great cousin, and Patricia in particular bonded with Sarah, following her around and asking endless questions. When Sarah finally had to return to Missouri, there were many tears, but also promises to write often and visit again. As the children grew, each developed their own distinct personality. Peter showed an aptitude for working with horses and cattle, often riding out with his father to check on the herd. He was serious and thoughtful, with a strong sense of responsibility. Patricia was the wild one, always climbing trees and racing her horse faster than her mother thought safe. She had Pierce's adventurous spirit and Penelope's determination, a combination that frequently gave both parents gray hairs. Pearl, the youngest, was quiet and bookish, much like her mother. She learned to read early and could often be found in the study, absorbed in whatever book she could get her hands on. Penelope loved reading with her daughter, sharing her favorite stories and watching Pearl's face light up with the same wonder she herself had felt when the written word finally revealed its secrets. In 1893, Arizona Territory saw significant changes. The silver market crashed, devastating many mining communities, and there were troubles with drought that affected ranchers throughout the region. The Double T weathered the difficulties better than most, thanks to Penelope's careful management of their finances and Pierce's skill at finding good grazing for the cattle, even in dry times. They helped their neighbors when they could, extending credit at the general store they now partially owned in Douglas and sharing resources during the hardest months. It earned them respect and gratitude throughout the community, cementing their reputation as fair and generous people. One evening in late summer of that difficult year, a young woman appeared at their door. She was thin and dusty from travel, with haunted eyes and a baby in her arms. She asked if they had any work, anything at all, and Penelope saw herself in that desperate face. "What is your name?" Penelope asked gently. "Ruth, madam, Ruth Carson. I can cook and clean, and I am not afraid of hard work. My husband died in the mines, and I just need a chance to get back on my feet." Penelope looked at Pierce, who nodded slightly. They did not really need additional help, but they both understood what it was to be desperate and alone. "We can use someone to help with the house and the children," Penelope said. "Room and board plus wages. Does that suit you?" The relief on Ruth's face was profound. "Yes, madam, thank you. You will not regret this." Ruth became part of the household, and her baby, a little boy named Thomas, became another child for Peter, Patricia, and Pearl to dote on. Watching Ruth slowly regain her confidence, and her smile reminded Penelope of her own journey, of the power of kindness and second chances. The 20th century arrived with celebration and hope. On January 1st, 1900, the whole family gathered on the porch to watch the sun rise on a new era. Peter was now 19, already helping to run the ranch with increasing independence. Patricia was 17, still wild but channeling her energy into training horses. Pearl was 12, her nose perpetually buried in books. "A new century," Pierce marveled, his arm around Penelope's waist. "Who would have thought back in 1878 that we would be here?" "Not me," Penelope admitted. "Back then I could not imagine a future at all. Now look at us. Look at what we have built." "Look at what you have built," Pierce corrected. The frightened woman who could not read her own name became a successful ranch owner, a mother, a pillar of the community. "I am in awe of you, Penelope Patterson." She leaned into him, breathing in his familiar scent, feeling the solid warmth of his body beside hers. They were both older now, their hair threaded with gray, their faces marked by years of sun and wind and laughter. But the love between them was as strong as ever, perhaps stronger, deepened by decades of partnership and shared experience. "I could not have done any of it without you," she said. "You believed in me when I could not believe in myself. You taught me to read, yes, but more importantly, you taught me that I was worthy of good things, that I deserved happiness and success." Pierce kissed her temple. "We taught each other. You showed me what real strength looks like, what determination and courage can accomplish. You made me a better man." Peter cleared his throat from where he stood with his sisters. "Are you two going to be mushy all day, or can we have breakfast? I am starving." Everyone laughed, and they headed inside to the feast Penelope and Ruth had prepared to celebrate the new century. Later that year, Peter announced that he wanted to marry Emily Foster, the daughter of a neighboring rancher. She was a sensible young woman with a quick smile and a good head for business, and both Pierce and Penelope approved wholeheartedly. The wedding was held at the ranch in October, with what seemed like half the territory in attendance. Watching her son exchange vows with his bride, Penelope felt the bittersweet pang of time passing, of her baby growing up and starting his own family. "He will be fine," Pierce whispered, reading her thoughts as he so often did. "We raised him well. He and Emily will build a good life together." "I know. It is just hard to let go." "You are not letting go. You are letting him fly. There is a difference." Peter and Emily built a house on the far side of the ranch property, close enough to help with the operation but far enough to have their own space. Within a year, they had presented Pierce and Penelope with their first grandchild, a baby boy they named James. Holding her grandson for the first time, Penelope was overwhelmed with emotion, marveling at the continuation of the family she and Pierce had created. Patricia married in 1903 to a cavalry officer stationed at the nearby fort. The match worried Penelope initially, as it meant Patricia would have to move wherever her husband was stationed. But she could not deny that Captain Michael Preston clearly adored her wild daughter and treated her as an equal partner, which was all Penelope could hope for. Pearl showed no interest in marriage, much to her mother's secret relief. She wanted to be a teacher, she announced at 16, and she was determined to get the education necessary to achieve that goal. Pierce and Penelope supported her ambition, sending her to the Territorial Normal School in Temp to train as an educator. "She gets that from you," Pierce told Penelope as they read Pearl's enthusiastic letters about her studies. "That love of learning, that desire to help others learn. You inspired her." "She is braver than I was," Penelope replied. Going off to school, pursuing her dreams without hesitation, she never had to feel the shame of not knowing, the fear of being discovered as ignorant. "That is because you made sure she would never have to feel those things. You gave all our children the education you wished you had." Pearl returned to Douglas in 1906 with her teaching certificate and immediately took a position at the local school. Penelope attended her daughter's first day with tears of pride in her eyes, watching Pearl command the classroom with natural authority and patience. She was teaching children to read, passing on the gift that had so transformed Penelope's own life. In February of 1912, Arizona finally achieved statehood, no longer a territory but a full member of the Union. Douglas celebrated with parades and speeches, and the Patterson family attended the festivities together. 3 generations gathered to witness history. "We have seen a lot of changes," Pierce commented as they watched the parade pass by. He was 62 now, his hair completely gray, his movements a bit slower, but his eyes still held that same warmth that had captivated Penelope all those years ago. "More than I could have ever imagined," Penelope agreed. She was 56, her auburn hair now more silver than red, her hands marked by years of work, but she felt content in a way her younger self could never have dreamed possible. Their grandchildren were multiplying, with Peter and Emily now having 4 children, and Patricia having just welcomed her second. The ranch was thriving, expanded over the years to encompass more land and more cattle. Pearl was making a difference in the lives of countless children, teaching them not just to read, but to love learning. As they walked home from the celebrations that evening, Pierce took Penelope's hand, lacing his fingers through hers as he had done 1,000 times before. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" he asked. "When you confessed you could not read or write. I remember the shame I felt. I remember thinking you would walk away, that no one would want to help someone as ignorant as me. And do you remember what I said?" Penelope smiled, the memory as clear as if it had happened yesterday rather than 34 years ago. You said, "Then I will teach you everything." Did I keep my promise? She stopped walking and turned to face him fully, reaching up to cup his weathered face in her hands. You taught me to read and write, yes, but you taught me so much more than that. You taught me to believe in myself, to see my own worth, to dream bigger than I thought possible. You taught me what love really means, what partnership looks like. You taught me everything that matters. Pierce's eyes grew misty, and he pulled her close, holding her against his heart. You taught me just as much. You showed me what real courage looks like, what determination can accomplish. You made me better than I ever would have been alone. They stood there in the fading evening light, two people who had found each other when they each needed someone most, who had built a life and a family and a legacy together. Around them, the town they had watched grow from a rough mining camp into a proper city continued its evening routines. Their children and grandchildren were safely tucked into their own homes. The ranch they had nurtured for decades sprawled across the hills, testimony to their hard work and dedication. "I love you," Penelope whispered. "Just as much as the day I married you, more even." "And I love you," Pierce replied, "with everything I am and everything I have." They walked the rest of the way home hand in hand, two partners who had weathered everything life threw at them and emerged stronger for it. The years continued to pass, bringing the inevitable sorrows and joys of a long life. They celebrated births and mourned deaths, weathered droughts and rejoiced in good seasons. They watched their grandchildren grow and begin to have children of their own, extending the Patterson legacy into yet another generation. On a warm spring evening in 1920, Pierce and Penelope sat on their porch as they had done countless times before. Pierce was 70 now, moving more slowly but still sharp-minded and loving. Penelope was 64, her body bearing the marks of a life well lived. "Read to me," Pierce asked, as he had been asking more often lately. His eyesight was failing, making it difficult for him to read the newspapers and books he loved. Penelope picked up the book she had been working through, a collection of poetry, and began to read aloud. Her voice was still strong, the words flowing smoothly from her lips. It never ceased to amaze her, even after all these years, that she could look at marks on a page and transform them into meaning, into beauty, into stories. When she finished the poem, Pierce reached over and took her hand. "Thank you. Your voice makes everything more beautiful." "I think you may be biased, absolutely biased. 42 years of marriage will do that to a man." He squeezed her hand gently. "It has been a good life, hasn't it?" "The best life," Penelope confirmed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Somewhere in the distance, they could hear their great-grandchildren playing, their laughter carried on the evening breeze. The ranch continued to thrive under Peter's management, with his own children now taking on more responsibility. "You have any regrets?" Pierce asked quietly. Penelope considered the question carefully. "I regret the years I spent in fear and shame before I met you. I regret that my mother did not live to see what became of me, to meet you and our children. But the life we have built together, I regret nothing about that. Every challenge, every hardship, every moment of joy, it all led us here to this moment, and I would not change a single thing." Pierce brought her hand to his lips and kissed it tenderly. "Nor would I. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Penelope Patterson. From that first day outside the general store until this very moment, you have been my greatest adventure and my deepest joy." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they remained on the porch, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something beautiful and lasting. The cowboy who had offered to teach a frightened young woman to read had gained a partner, a love, a life beyond his wildest dreams. And the woman who had confessed her inability to read in shame had discovered that true literacy went far beyond words on a page. It was about believing in yourself, about having someone believe in you, about building a life of meaning and purpose. The story of Pierce and Penelope Patterson became one that was told and retold in their family for generations. It was a story about kindness and second chances, about the transformative power of education and love, about two people who had chosen each other and built something extraordinary together. And every time it was told, it reminded their descendants that everyone deserves a chance to learn, to grow, to become more than they thought possible. Their love story did not end on that porch in 1920, though that was one of many perfect moments. They had several more good years together, watching their family continue to grow and thrive, seeing the ranch prosper even through the difficulties of the early 20th century, taking joy in each new day and each other's company. When Pierce finally passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1925, at the age of 75, Penelope mourned deeply, but without regret. They had been given 47 years together, far more than many couples received, and every year had been a gift. She lived another 8 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who adored her, still reading voraciously, still managing the ranch accounts with her clear, careful hand. Before she died, Penelope wrote out their story in her own neat handwriting, wanting future generations to know how it all began. She wrote about the shame she had felt, about the cowboy who had smiled and offered to teach her everything, about the life they had built together. She wrote about learning to read, about falling in love, about building a ranch and a family and a legacy. The last line of her memoir read, "I came to Douglas with nothing but fear and shame, unable to even read my own name. I died here, surrounded by love, having read thousands of books and written the story of a life beyond my wildest dreams. And all of it began with a kind cowboy who saw not what I lacked, but what I could become. To Pierce, who taught me everything that mattered, thank you. I will love you beyond this life and into whatever comes next." The memoir became a treasured family heirloom, passed down through the generations, a testament to what two people can build when they choose kindness, patience, and love. And in the quiet cemetery outside Douglas, Arizona, two headstones stand side by side, marking the resting place of Pierce and Penelope Patterson, whose love story began with a confession of shame and a promise to teach, and ended only when this life released them into whatever awaited beyond.